Please, I have a wife and children. He cries under your grip as you hold the knife above him. You burst out laughing. And who do you think sent me? The queen was dead. The other heirs were out of the way, one way or another. Technically, the kingdom now belonged to the man who lay beside Cyril. She wished she'd never asked this of him. She wished she'd never had to ask this of him. He was asleep now, his grip on her no longer tight enough to hurt. She stroked his hair. There was one thing that still bothered her. One thing she still had to do. His father, the old king, had never turned up after their rampage to the castle. Not alive, not as a body. He'd been nothing but Cordelia's puppet, but he was still a threat, one that needed to be taken care of. She couldn't ask that of Razel, and he didn't want her to leave his side, so it had to be taken care of before he woke up. That wouldn't be for a while. She'd laced the tea she made him, just enough to give him one long, peaceful sleep. No more. Still, she was careful as she untangled herself from his arms, and her quiet hunter's step carried her around the room as she did one last inspection to make sure nobody would have a chance to hurt him. She didn't look back as she slipped through the main door, the one entrance she hadn't sealed off. Two guards stood outside, one she'd handpicked. They were young, which meant they were pliable, but not unskilled. She gave them a nod and set off into the dark passageways of the castle. The minute she was out of sight, she melted into the shadows. Always a hunter at heart, and she was on the trail now, following a servant's tunnel into the castle's lower levels, where she'd eventually come across the tunnel that led out of the city into the surrounding countryside. When she reached the escape tunnel, the dust told her a story that the pampered castle types would miss. It had been disturbed recently, by only 3 sets of footprints. She was right. This would be easy. The tunnel was long, dark, and damp, but that was nothing to her. She reached the end and pulled herself up a ladder, emerging from a hatch hidden within a tree stump. It was almost too storybook, she thought. The tunnel ended just outside a small outlying village, and the house she was looking for was pretty easy to identify, because it was the only one with a lamp still burning in the window. Nobody would waste fuel, especially not now, leaving a lamp on unless they needed it, just as they were looking for threats in the darkness. Now that threat was Cyril. No amount of light would have helped them avoid her. The night was her disguise, and she made her way to the door of the house without issue. For a moment she considered knocking down the lantern with a well-placed arrow shot and let them burn alive. That was the coward's way to do it, and whatever else she wasn't a coward. Slowly, carefully, she knocked an arrow into her bow, then she tapped the door, as though she were a nervous messenger with a delivery to make. The guards were complacent that they wouldn't be found, and it made them sloppy. The first barely had time to speak before an arrow sailed through his eye and into his brain. The second got as far as drawing her sword with an angry shout before she too fell, this time with a broadhead through her heart. Then Cyril switched her bow for her blade, ready for a bloodbath. But when she entered the house, there were none but the king, armored but unarmed, sitting at a table with a bowl of stew. When he looked up at Cyril, the furrow between his brow and the fear in his face were familiar. She faltered for a moment. He made no attempt to flee or fight back. I don't know who you are, or why you're after my family. Just, please, I have a wife, I have children, I want to get back to them. Just for a moment, Cyril's sword dropped. You don't get why I'm here, do you? The king shook his head. Cyril laughed a cold, bitter laugh. I'm here because of your son, the son that was never good enough for you, the son that your wife threw to the wolves. And you're the wolf, I'm guessing? Us wolves gave him a home when you wouldn't. I'll forever regret letting my beloved do that. Forever won't be much longer. Cyril raised the blade. You didn't just fail your children, you failed the whole kingdom. Wolves or demons, take your pick. There's no difference for me either way. You're right, there isn't. Cyril shut her eyes and felt her sword bite into the king's neck. She'd stayed like that until the little house was silent, save for the crackling of the fire. Then she wiped her blade clean on a folded shirt and turned her back on all of it. Grabbing the lantern from where it sat in the window, standing at the door, she hurled it onto the floor and it shattered, spitting hot oil everywhere. It took the flame instantly, and she disappeared back into the grass long before the village folk noticed the flame. She watched as they roused and began to take action. Then she slipped back into the tunnel and headed back to the castle. When the new king Lazel awoke, Cyril was sitting on the edge of the bed watching him. You smell like smoke, he mumbled. Yeah, don't worry about it, she replied. reaching for him. He took her hand and she helped him sit upright. He still looked pretty out of it, but when he looked at her, there was that familiar worried crease between his brows. She shut her eyes and leaned into him. When she opened them again, she took his hand and she told him what she had done.